The wild edges are something that divide our community here in southeast Cornwall. Our parents and our grandparents grew up in a generation where the aesthetic was to be neat and tidy, cut grass, sprayed and small borders. But we need to drastically change that aesthetic because the truth remains that since 1970 we have lost over 50% of our biodiversity. We're also living in a time of national food crisis and massive NHS waiting lists. So what is a wild edge? What's inside it? Could it be a source of food and medicine? Could it be a way to repopulate biodiversity? Or is it purely just weeds? We are here today to find out exactly what's in these wild edges and how we can utilise them to help our community.
Is there one particular bird that fascinates you down here?
The kingfisher.
Oh, of course, yeah. We think there's a nest over here, don't we? Have you got any questions about any of the bird life?
I have actually. Why is the long grass important for baby birds?
Very important for the young birds because it not only provides cover but also nesting material. The longer grass promotes the insects and obviously pollen for the bees.
Why are insects important for birds?
Well, I like to think of insects as kind of like plankton of the land. If you think of the analogy of plankton in the sea, which everyone knows are the bottom of the food chain and the start of an ecosystem, insects on the land are very much the same. So it may not actually directly provide food for certain birds, but some of the animals and mammals and amphibians that feed on the insects perhaps do. And that creates a whole food chain and an ecosystem. And without the longer grass and leaving the banks as they are, then there would be less insects. And obviously then there would be less animals and creatures further up the food chain and ecosystem.
If all this lovely grass were to be cut down, what would the impact be?
Well, it's not only the grass, but the wildflowers. It would basically disrupt the ecosystem and it would stop any of the insects from growing and reproducing. And then, of course, that affects everything up the food chain. Everything depends upon a basis level.
So let's have a look. See, at first glance, there's not much here when you look at it and you walk past. But once you get into macro, just in this small area, there could be hundreds of different invertebrates.
It's like a very fussy model. Oh, that's really nice. There's a spider over here. Just there.
It's really nice with the water droplets on it. These are called the mandibles. Instantly we've seen 3 or 4 different species there, just by looking a little bit closer and not walking past. This habitat here is probably one of the most diverse habitat in the community, as more stuff is found here, the wildflowers, fungus, edible plants, as well as the invertebrates. So much in abundance here, it's incredible.
What is one of your favourite things to take photos of?
I'm particularly interested in solitary wasps. They are incredible and there's so many different types and they all provide something.
Lots of people ask, what is the point of them?
That's a very good question. Everyone always asks that. And yes, they can be annoying to some people, but to me, I find them so fascinating and they have a massive place in the ecosystem. Same as with all the other stuff. People ask, what's the point in all this? But this is the habitat for wasps, ants. They're all prey for the bigger ecosystem, so we wouldn't have the woodpeckers here or anything else without the invertebrates for the birds to feed on, and without those base layers of the insects there wouldn't be the bigger mammals and birds that we've got in this lovely place now.
I've heard that we've lost so much wildlife over the years. What can people of my generation do to help restore and protect it?
There's loads that people of your age can do. You guys have got the power to go into your schools, tell your teachers, your parents how much you love wild spaces like this. And even though they may look overgrown, that there is actually an abundance of wildlife here and we should be protecting them, so you guys can spread the message.
Here we go, it is a really good area. You can see here, look at this. This is an Agaricus augustus. Very similar to the mushrooms you get in the supermarket, but we know this is distinct because of these amazing scales. And mushrooms are very safe to touch. As long as we don't eat them without knowing what they are, we need to actually touch them to help us identify them. In this case, we can feel these hairy scales. Before we pick this mushroom, before we can truly identify what it is and know if we can take it home and safely eat it, we should really make sure there are more around, because you don't really want to take just one. It's not always sustainable, it's not good practice, and it stops other people from enjoying it as well. Oh, there's loads! Now we've identified that we've got 5 other mushrooms here, we can take this one over here, the 6th, safely and sustainably, so we can look at it more closely. Isn't that amazing? Now what we're going to... One of my favourite features about this mushroom, and a helpful identifying feature, is that it has an amazing smell like almonds. It's a bit unusual. So now we know that mushrooms are safe to touch and to smell, and in fact that act of getting to know them through our senses is important for their identification. You can go away and tell your friends that we shouldn't be kicking them or knocking them over, but we should be admiring them. There's something that is a good sign of ecological health, something to be admired in the meadow.
What are these piles here?
These are actually colonies of ants. They're called ant hills, and we find them all over our countryside, especially in our graveyards. And what you see there is actually 1/10, because a metre underground there is the rest of the colony. Tunnels, storehouses, nurseries, all sorts of places. They aerate the soil, the ants keep down the predators, they feed on all sorts of things, both plants and animals. So they are a very good asset to have in the garden or in the graveyard.
Why are they here specifically?
They tell us that these were once ancient meadows. They are very important to the biodiversity. In other words, the more species we can introduce, the more habitats we can introduce, the better, because this world is in crisis. Our countryside is in crisis. It doesn't matter to old codgers like me, but what I'm more worried about is my grandchildren, and what sort of landscape am I going to give my grandchildren when they become my age. So all the work we're doing now is not for the past, I'm doing it for my grandchildren. That's what's important.
Lots of people say that an untidy graveyard is disrespectful to the people who are buried here. What do you think about that?
That's a good question, but we must remember this whole thing is about short grass, tidy grass. Tidy grass is a new modern thing. When these people were buried in the 1800s, the grave was left to grow, and every summer there were beautiful wildflowers. And then in October, the sexton of the church would come along and mow all the grass down. There was no such thing as amenity grass or short grass until the invention of the lawnmower. So we're not being disrespectful to the dead at all. What we are being is respect for the future and our future generations. That's the important thing. I mean, we look around and we see, to some eyes, untidy grassland. To my eyes, absolutely perfect grassland for the biodiversity. Again, I say the earth is in crisis, and we have to do our best to increase habitats and to increase biodiversity. And we must think of the future and not of the past.
So I feel it's our collective community responsibility to teach especially our children what we have growing here in our hedgerow. There is food, there is medicine, and they are the guardians that can help to repopulate what we have lost over the years.